This lesson covers special rules for augmenting verbs. Remember, the epsilon augment is going to be used to mark the aorist and the imperfect tenses. But there are certain situations where this epsilon is not necessarily visible. The most obvious reason is when we have a temporal augment. And this happens when our stem begins in a vowel. Right, when the stem begins in a vowel, instead of adding simply an epsilon, what we're going to do is lengthen that vowel. So this is very easy when the stem begins in an alpha or an eta or an omicron. So an alpha or an omicron, those are going to shift to an eta. And I should say the same thing happens with stems that begin with, so these are stems that begin with alpha or omicron. Alpha becomes an eta, an epsilon becomes an eta, omicron becomes an omega. So a couple of examples. Ago, stem begins in alpha, that lengthens to in the imperfect agon. Or horizo, to divide, the omicron becomes an omega, horizon. So that's very easy if your initial vowel is short. But what happens with an iota, which can be both long or short, or an epsilon, which can be both long or short? These are going to stay the same. That is, they just become long versions of this. So it's a long iota or a long epsilon. You can't tell the difference, but you will be able to tell the difference by the endings. So if you take a look at ago and agon, these imperfect endings are very different from the present endings. And eta and omega, which are long, they just stay long. So heidomai, to be pleasing, heidomain. So the eta here stays eta, or ophelao, to help or aid, ophelun. So the omega stays in omega. So you have to watch the endings. If the stem is originally epsilon, alpha, or omicron, it's easy to tell. But if they're not, if it's one of these vowels, watch those endings. Now, one special case is the verb echo, to have. Its imperfect is actually akon. It's irregular, so that epsilon augment has become epsilon iota. So that's what we do with temporal augments. Now there's one other situation where things get a little dodgy, and that's if we have a compound verb. So a compound verb like eis ago, where we have a prefix and the verb. How do we augment that? Well, we're going to augment, the basic rule is to augment the verb, not the prefix. The prefix stays the same. We're just going to augment ago. So the first simplest example is this eis ago. We augment just the ago, and we get eis agon. So we've augmented that. So in order to recognize what was this originally, you have to take off the prefix, realize this is an augment. Well, what can augment into an eta and alpha? So we have eis ago. Another situation, if the prefix is ek, that augment a pempon, so ek pempo, to send out, that ek becomes x before the vowel, so exapempon. And so to de-augment it, we take out the augment, and we shift this x back to the kappa. Ek pempon, ek pempo is what you'd look up in the dictionary. So we have a basic, simple compound. We have compound with ek, and then we have compounds with pro, or compounds that end in omicron. Again, we're going to so pro pempo, to send forth. We're going to augment the pempo. So we have pro epempon, and then what happens is these two vowels contract to an u, so prupempon. Now, and the accent should be there. Now we've got two-syllable. If we have a two-syllable prefix, like apo here, apothnesko, to die. We're going to augment again the stem, but we're going to elide the O, the omicron. So apethneskon. We've augmented here, we've augmented the verb stem, and we've elided the omicron. So to find the dictionary entry, we have to de-augment it, de-augment the verb. We have op, that's not a prefix, but apo is, and then apothnesko. So in order to find the verb, you have to really work backwards from the imperfects. The other case that you might run into is augments or compounds with peri. It's 2-syllable, but it's not omicron, it's peri. Peri is special. Peri, we're going to keep the whole prefix. So peri epempon. We're still augmenting the verb stem, but we're going to keep all of peri there. Now the final special case, the strange thing that will happen, is verbs that are compounded with the prefix sun. Originally this is what this prefix looks like. But sun becomes sum if the stem begins in beta, pi, or phi, so sumbalo. So it's started with a sun, but because of the beta in balo, it's become sumbalo. If we don't want to augment that, we're going to still augment our stem, balo, but because the nu and the beta are no longer right next to each other, we're going to go back to the nu of sun. So from sumbalo to sun ebalon. And if we want to look this up in the dictionary, we have to de-augment it and recognize, this nu will shift to a mu because of the proximity to the beta, and we get sumbalo. Sun becomes sung with a gamma before kappa, gamma, and chi. So like sung gignosko. So the stem there, the verb stem that we're building on is gignosko. And if we want to augment it, we're going to augment the gignosko. Gignoskon. And because the sun is not next to the gamma, we can go back to the sun. So sune gignoskon. And sun becomes sul with a lambda. It assimilates to the lambda if the stem begins with a lambda. So sulambano. But when we augment it, that sul goes back to its original sun. Sunelambanon. So there's some backwards forming that you need to pay attention to. So the basic rule for all of these compound augmenting rules is that in order to find a verb in the dictionary, and the dictionary, remember, gives you the present tense, you have to de-augment it. And this is sometimes going to take a little bit of back formation. But if you know the rules, you should be able to work backwards from that.